intention from the beginning to wreck Britain, and they planned this all, and we were just duped again. Well, I have a different opinion. I don't think we were duped again. I think that the British people really came through and showed that they won independence. Yes, they're going to collapse the whole economy of the whole world so that they can create the chaos that they'll need to stage the alien invasion and then the coming of the alien messiah. And all, yeah, I know they're doing all that. But the original plan was actually to have a United States of Europe, the EU that would control that part, the African Union, the North American Union, which would probably come into the South American Union. That was the plan. The plan now has to be altered. Now, they're good at sometimes recovering in these things, but I think that they lost a big one, and I think the British people and all of us who were disseminating information at the time should be really celebrating. Look, they spent millions of dollars promoting stay in Britain, stay in the EU. They put pencils with Remain on them in all the voting places, and they have you vote in pencil. And we have a tape on another podcast we made about this of a woman scratching out a leave vote and putting in a stay vote. So they're doing all this stuff. Plus, every major politician, including Jeremy Corbyn, who was a get out of EU all his life, they switched him. So they really wanted to do it. But the big thing that got me was the rainstorm. There was a rainstorm the night before and flooding in London, I think designed to keep people from the polls from voting. And there's only one organization that can create a rainstorm besides God, and that's the harp and those guys. So I'll tell you what, I'm not going to let it down. I'm not going to think that we were defeated. I'm not going to think that it's business as usual. I'm going to continue to think that we made a big delaying tactic, if anything else, on the Brexit vote. And quite frankly, here, we're still dancing around the breakfast table. All right, here we are. I'm happy for Britain, and I only wish the best for them. I think when they get together and work together, they're going to find that they're going to be fine. You know, part of this, looking at what happened and saying, oh, well, we played right into their hands again, is partially because we have played into their hands a lot of times. But then there's the other factor. There's the Wizard of Oz factor, and I want to focus in on that today. I think what we're going to find when we look behind the curtain at all this powerful money position stuff, that there's really not much there. And I'll get into that more as we go into it. But don't be afraid of the Wizard of Oz. Don't be afraid of the globalists. There are other things that supersede them and are a lot more powerful than them. And I think we're going to find that they're a lot less powerful than we think they are. They're tricky. They're tricky. And speaking of tricks, let's move into the Mandela effect. Now, some people still doubt the existence of the Mandela effect. And the Mandela effect is people remembering things differently than documentation or logos are happening now. In other words, you could see a written document like the Bible that used to say this, now says this. There's a lot of different instances. They're all over. I've seen videos that show 200 instances of the Mandela effect. Now, I think some of them are maybe a stretch, maybe some people remembering falsely, but there are some that are real and true. And when you get one that resonates with you, like the Fruit Loops one, oddly enough, resonates with me, because I used to eat that. And I know it was UIT, now it's OOT. And they've changed all the documentation going back to the beginning, so there's no notice it was ever UIT. And the people that work there, of course, everybody that works in a corporation has only worked there a matter of years or months. Can't go back to the beginning. So they're going to read things from archives that were adjusted by the Mandela effect. I want to show you one we found last night. That's just another example of how powerful this is and that it's actually happening. Let's look at these two clips.
What wouldst thou know, my queen?
Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
That was a clip from the 1937 movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, take a look at a 1961 video called The Last Woman on Earth, where she's reciting from that same dialogue, but her dialogue is the original dialogue, not the dialogue that was changed by the Mandela. Listen to her.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?
Okay, so what you saw was an example of the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect changed the original, which was, take it from me, I'm old enough to remember, mirror, mirror on the wall, and they changed it to magic mirror on the wall. But they neglected to catch this piece of dialogue from The Last Woman on Earth, who uses the original mirror, mirror on the wall. Now, when they skip something like this, or they don't pick it up, that's called residue. And there's a lot of residue around these different things. And to me, that tells you that whatever's doing this, or however it's working, it's not perfect. And what I've been told is if it's AI or maybe demon magic or whatever, AI works on constant feedback. In other words, they're constantly learning, constantly adjusting, so that seeing this account in cyberspace, they could actually catch it before the video gets to you. So they could change mirror, mirror on the wall to magic mirror on the wall and do that. And that's how they're going to do it. I would imagine that the AI or whatever mechanism is working this is learning and catching this residue and cleaning up the residue. I would assume that that's how it's working. But I want you to remember one other thing, that it's not perfect. In other words, it's not coming out perfect. They're making errors. They're leaving residue. There are things that if you research deep enough, you're going to find. Now, of course, when they hear about it, they might change that, or they may not. But I think the first thing to remember about this particular Wizard of Oz, this particular deception, is that it's not perfect. And it works on feedback, and it's trying to get things right. Let's move on to another discovery that, actually, I didn't make this. I learned this from Photohelix. But we learned it from watching the Zapruder films. Let's watch that, and I'll talk about it while we watch it. All right, what I'm showing you is a Zapruder film of the Kennedy assassination. Now, this is a very telling piece of film, and what was altered in this film and all the other films of the Kennedy assassination is they put an additional seat in the car. In other words, rather than it being a four-seater, they've made it a six-seater with kind of a metal roll bar that you might be able to see there. Kind of a roll bar. It's silver. That wasn't in there. And there's plenty of residue left around to investigate this thing. There are replica cars on display of this car that only have four seats. But I think the most telling thing, and this wasn't my discovery, this is by Photohelix. If you look at the new man that they've inserted here, it looks to me like he is out of proportion with the other heads in the car. It looks like his head is a tad smaller if you go from here to here, here to there, here to there. It might just be, they might have enlarged it since we saw it last, but both Photohelix and I did notice this. It looks like that head is smaller than the two Kennedy's heads. And if that's the case, that tells me a lot. Not only are they unable to pick up all the residue, but also they're not altering the actual event. In other words, this is a historical count of an event. It's a video, and we know that that can be easily altered. And if you're sophisticated enough and you're AI or have some kind of supernatural power, you should be able to look in all these other positions where the historical accounts occur and modify them too. And since if it's an AI, it's constantly learning, and things that we find, it's going to learn from our findings and modify it. Now, that may not be absolute proof that they're not changing reality, but I'll go with you. To me, it really looks like we have a much smaller head. Even now, let's go through it one more time. You know, actually, he wasn't there. So this is a photoshopped, a created image that went in there. I think the head that's small is right about there. But anyway, you may disagree with me, but I still contend that they're not modifying history. What they're doing is they're modifying accounts of history. They're modifying documentation, films, logos, and that kind of thing for history. And it's not, and their changes aren't perfect because they leave residue all over the place for us to pick up and find. So that tells me a lot about whatever's doing this. Okay, so we can pick apart little pieces and try to figure out what's going on in this reality, because there are going to be some stranger things than this happening. And we're ill-equipped to do it because we're working against two major factors. And they're both under the general heading of science. The science that we're given, the only science that we're given, is material science. This works on the fact that this is a physical reality, and that stone wall back there is a physical stone wall, and it's all about physics. And when it gets smaller and smaller, it gets down to the molecules, and then you get down to the atoms, and the atoms are these little things that everything is made up of. Except for the fact that that's really not the case. Atoms only exist sometimes. There's a thing called the measurement dilemma, or the measurement problem, that everybody has when they're working with atoms. They're only there when you watch them, and then not always. So we're not dealing with a real physical reality, which is the only science they give us, physical reality. So if you're gonna take a course, if you're gonna study biology, if you're gonna study anything, you're gonna start from the premise that we live in a physical reality, in a physical domed, or physical universe is what you're gonna hear, and that it's all solid. And actually, that only counts for a tiny part, and we'll get in of reality, and we'll get into that later. The other part of it is that science has really become a religion. They have their own doctrines, their own credos, and they only allow certain things to be proved that go along with their paradigm, with their portrait or picture of what the world really is. If it's out of sync with that. In other words, we have a global warming problem here on the plane, totally made up by this false science. There's plenty of scientists, including climate scientists, that don't agree with this, but you can't disagree. They're going to make disagreeing with that against the law, because we have a sacred science. If you people that have been into the flat earth for a while, as we have, know that, they always say, well, you got to stick with science. Science tells you this, science tells you that. But then when the science that's produced by the flat earth community comes out, it's never even looked at. It's never refuted. We watched one last night by Rob Skiba, who was on Lake Michigan, sighting Chicago across Lake Michigan. I think it started at like 48 miles away. And you could see it plain as day. Well, according to the statistics for the curvature of the Earth, you certainly wouldn't be able to see that. It would be thousands of feet below the horizon. But they never look at that. Things like NASA and the flaws in NASA's account, the bubbles in that appear during the spacewalks. They never explain that. This science that we've adopted never explains stuff like that. Frequently, when I go outside this house, I can see the sun and the moon in the same sky. What does that mean? Does it mean that in China there's no sun or moon? I don't know. So science has two big drawbacks. One, it's totally materialistic, which really doesn't work with most of reality. And second of all, it's tightly patrolled, and they only allow stuff in science that they agree with. It's as if we're working with someone behind the curtain, as if they have something to hide, and there's nobody back there. It's as if we really used real science and really could get to the bottom of these things, the bottom would be very, very different, which is what I want to encourage during this talk. There's a whole other type of science that takes into account a lot more of reality than materialistic science does. It views consciousness as like the ground of all being. It views an electronic universe of thought and consciousness and energy. And it's been competing with our material science ever since the beginning. Actually, Plato said our materialistic reality is an inferior copy of a more perfect world. So to understand that more perfect world, we have to look beyond science. Recently, there have been famous quotes by scientists advocating this viewpoint. Let me read you a few. Here's one by Max Planck. He says, quote, "All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds the most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind the force the existence of a conscious or an intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And if you think about the mind being that, then you can realize that there probably is a creator God, even if he is if he's only a video gamer. I don't think he is. I think he's a divine creator, and he's created something incredible. But without that divine creator, then you have to piece together all these other Big Bang theory, the evolution theory, and things based on material science that'll give you a way to explain things that doesn't take into account the real nature of reality, which is likely energy and consciousness. Let me give you another one. Here's one by Nikola Tesla. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And we've made videos on people that have worked with Tesla technology that go way beyond material science. It can appear and disappear and move throughout what we would consider an impossibility, physical reality. Here's another Tesla. The day science begins to study non-physical phenomenon, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. And I would say more than that, because right now, with science the way it is, falsifying test results, being paid off at every opportunity, you're dead in the water right now. My opinion is we're dead in the water. Here's one by Werner Heisenberg. Quote, the atoms or elementary particles themselves are not real. They form a world of potentialities or possibilities rather than one of things or facts. See, if you think of the world in terms of consciousness, thoughts, facts, energy, it's a lot easier to imagine how the control system is manipulating, I don't know, through an AI or demon magic or however, these holographic, energetic particles. Here's the best one from Tesla. He says, today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. I think that's especially true with the ball earthers, because they have mathematical formulas for everything, but they don't explain reality. Of course, this reinforces the left brain paradigm they want to keep us in. Facts and figures and computations, not ideas and inspiration and creation. So that's a big part of this, keeping us in this little box. In addition to not being able to figure out what's going on with the Mandela effect and how they've been able to trick us into living on a globe Earth for so long. Now we can fast forward to today. Now you know that they're using CERN, possibly in conjunction with AI, to manipulate the environment and bring in this apocalyptic ending and create these incredible, hard-to-believe manifestations that are going to come forward. Here's a quote about CERN and the Hadron Collider. This is from a Dr. Brian Whitworth, published a paper which contrasted the materialistic and idealistic views, which he framed as the physical realm and the quantum realm. And he says, quote, the Higgs boson is the virtual particle created by an invisible field to explain another virtual particle created by another invisible field to explain an actual effect, neutron decay. And if you're a flat earther like we are, you know that that's what they do. They create stories that back up stories that back up stories, none of which hold water. Back to the quote. Given dark energy and dark matter, it explains at best 4% of the mass of the universe. But the standard model needs it. So when, after 50 years, CERN found a millionth of a second signal in the possible range, physics was relieved. There's no evidence that this particle has any effect on mass at all, but the standard model, again, survives. I want you to look at this quick little film before we finish. It's about electromagnetic spectrum. Let's play it.
The electromagnetic spectrum, an immense scale we use to measure the wavelengths of all kinds of radiation. At one end are radio waves with the longest wavelengths. At the other end are gamma rays with the shortest. In between are the other bands, including visible light, which is such a tiny fraction of the whole, it's difficult to imagine. How small is the visible spectrum? If you had a reel of movie film representing the entire electromagnetic spectrum, stretching 2,500 miles from California to Alaska. The section containing the visible spectrum would fall somewhere in the middle, near the University of Washington.
This frame is the whole visible spectrum. It is one frame and over 2,000 miles of tape, and it's everything that the human eye can see. The importance of this frame is that stars emit almost all of their light in this part of the spectrum.
So when you look at that little piece of film, that's the reality that they have you trapped into. That's what you can see and feel. That's everything. And they've got you trapped in there. Think bigger. You know, the globalists, don't think that the globalists are something like the Wizard of Oz and they're all powerful and they can do anything. You know, the whole story of the Wizard of Oz says that we have what we need. The Tin Man had a heart. The lion had courage. We have everything we need. We just think we're up against a force that is all powerful. It's not. I think we took them down. I think we set them back at least with the Brexit vote. Look at Iceland. Iceland jailed their bankers a couple of years ago, and now they've just elected a new president that, get this, he's not a politician. He's a human being. So keep that in mind. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that the Mandela effect probably does not change reality. It only changes documents related to reality. It changes logos. It changes accounts. It's not changing reality. I don't think this force, whatever they have, can change reality. Also, it's sloppy and it's not doing a very good job. And I'll tell you what, the globalists, if they're depending on AI to make their New World Order work, no wonder they're building bunkers, because it's ridiculous. If you talk to any AI professional and knows what they're doing, they'll tell you that it's just such an unreliable technology, they'd rather use a conventional computer. Let's remember not to give them power that they really don't have. Remember that they've been working on this climate change fraud since the 70s, and they still don't have their tax that they want. They're scaring a lot of people, and they're creating huge problems for the third world because they can't get energy. That's holding them back, actually. So don't think that they can do more than they can do. Also, the flat earth, if you're a flat earther like we are, that's a checkmate for the alien messiah, for Project Bluebeam. If you know you live on the flat earth, if you've moved to the flat earth like we, that's just a total sham. They're not going to be able to pull the Bluebeam thing off. We're going to laugh right in their faces. Okay, so I want you to think of the world you live in as something different than a physical reality. I want you to think of it as like a matrix, a playground of opportunities and things that you can do. Move into the non-physical reality. It gives you a lot more opportunities for learning. Move out of their physicality reality that's designed to keep you in lack, bring you to chaos, and have you welcome their further confinement in that system. What I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself, since the energetic and consciousness-based reality is just based on possibilities, how can anybody keep you prisoner in a matrix made of possibilities? Well, the secret is they can't, and they won't. Just don't give them the Wizard of Oz status, that there's something big and scary behind that curtain, because I think you're going to find there's nothing there. Thank you. God bless you. Have a good one. Because, it was the globalists' intention from the beginning to wreck Britain, and they planned this all, and we were just duped again. Well, I have a differing opinion. I don't think we were duped again. I think that the British people really came through and showed that they want independence. Yes, they're going to collapse the whole economy of the whole world so that they can create the chaos that they'll need to stage the alien invasion and then the coming of the alien messiah and all that. Yeah. I know they're doing all that, but the original plan was actually to have a United States of Europe, the EU that would control that part, the African Union, the North American Union, which would probably come into the South American Union. That was the plan. The plan now has to be altered. Now, they're good at sometimes recovering in these things, but I think that they lost a big one, and I think the British people and all of us who were disseminating information at the time should be really celebrating. Look, they spent millions of dollars promoting stay in Britain, stay in the EU. They put pencils with Remain on them in all the voting places, and they have you vote in pencil. And we have a tape on another podcast we made about this of a woman scratching out a leave vote and putting in a stay vote. So they're doing all this stuff. Plus every major politician, including Jeremy Corbyn, who was a get out of EU all his life, they switched him. So they really wanted to do it. But the big thing that got me was the rainstorm. There was a rainstorm the night before and flooding in London, I think designed to keep people from the polls from voting. And there's only one organization that can create a rainstorm besides God, and that's the harp and those guys. So I'll tell you what, I'm not going to let it down. I'm not going to think that we were defeated. I'm not going to think that it's business as usual. I'm going to continue to think that we made a big delaying tactic, if anything else, on the Brexit vote. And quite frankly, here, we're still dancing around the breakfast table. All right, here we are. I'm happy for Britain, and I only wish the best for them. I think when they get together and work together, they're going to find that they're going to be fine. You know, part of this, looking at what happened and saying, oh, well, we played right into their hands again, is partially because we have played into their hands a lot of times. But then there's the other factor. There's the Wizard of Oz factor, and I want to focus in on that today. I think what we're going to find when we look behind the curtain at all this powerful money, position stuff, that there's really not much there. And I'll get into that more as we go into it. But don't be afraid of the Wizard of Oz. Don't be afraid of the globalists. There are other things that supersede them and are a lot more powerful than them. And I think we're going to find that they're a lot less powerful than we think they are. They're tricky. They're tricky. And speaking of tricks, let's move into the Mandela effect. Now, some people still doubt the existence of the Mandela effect. And the Mandela effect is people remembering things differently than